You know, it's interesting, so many people wake up every morning with the same question echoing in their minds. How can I find a job? They scroll through listings, send out resumes, check emails, and wait anxiously for a response that might never come. And yet, the deeper question, the one that truly defines the direction of your life, isn't what job should I take, but what was I created to do? That's a much more profound, unsettling, and liberating question. Because the truth is, God's plan for your life was never about employment, it's about purpose. A job is temporary, but a calling is eternal. Dr. David Yongi Cho used to say that many believers spend their energy trying to fit into positions that were never designed for them. They chase what society calls stability, only to feel spiritually empty once they get it. That emptiness, that quiet ache you feel even when everything looks fine on paper. It's your soul's way of saying, this isn't it. You can have the paycheck, the office, the recognition, and still feel disconnected from what truly matters. Because a job satisfies your need for income, but a calling satisfies your need for significance. When you start to understand that difference, everything changes. The pressure to figure it all out begins to lift, and you realize that your worth isn't tied to what you do, but to who you are in God's plan. Think about it. Before you ever submitted a resume, God had already written your destiny. He knew your strengths, your desires, your challenges, and He designed them to fit into a larger story that's still unfolding. So maybe that rejection you faced wasn't punishment. Maybe it was protection. Maybe God was closing a door to save you from living beneath your potential. The great psychological trap of our age is that we equate productivity with purpose. We think that as long as we're busy, we're moving forward. But busyness doesn't always mean progress. Sometimes we're running fast, but in the wrong direction. This is where the spiritual and the psychological overlap. Until you pause long enough to hear God's direction, you'll keep mistaking activity for destiny. The world rewards hustle, but heaven rewards alignment. There's a powerful moment that happens when you stop striving for a title and start asking for truth. You begin to see that what you thought was your career might have just been training for your calling. Every experience, every disappointment, every closed door, it all adds up. God never wastes a season. The detours, the confusion, the waiting, it's all raw material that He uses to form the foundation of your greater purpose. Philosophically speaking, the human mind craves control. We want to know what's next. We want to plan it, structure it, and manage it. But faith disrupts that instinct. It invites you to step into uncertainty and trust that God's unseen plan is more solid than any visible opportunity. When you let go of your need to control every outcome, you make space for divine creativity to work in your life. And that's when the magic happens. The right opportunities begin to find you, not because you chased them, but because you became aligned with your purpose. Here's the shift that changes everything. Instead of praying, God, give me a job, start praying, God, reveal my purpose. Because when you discover your purpose, the right work will follow. Opportunities that match your design will start to appear. The moment you live from calling instead of desperation, you stop begging life for meaning and start creating meaning through obedience. So, if you're in a season where nothing seems to be working, take heart. Maybe God is reprogramming your direction, not denying your dreams. He's not asking you to settle, He's asking you to step up. to trust that His plan is not confined to a paycheck, but connected to a purpose so much greater than you can currently see. And that's where the power lies, not in securing a position, but in surrendering your ambition. When you align your pursuit with God's design, you move from survival to significance. You stop searching for a job and start stepping into destiny. You slow down when doors don't open as quickly as we expect. We panic. We start assuming that something's wrong with us or that God has forgotten us. But maybe what looks like delay isn't punishment, it's preparation. Maybe the reason things are taking longer is because the person you're becoming is just as important as the dream you're chasing. Dr. David Yongi Cho often said that faith is not about seeing results. It's about trusting a process you can't always understand. And that's what makes waiting so uncomfortable. Psychologically, our brains crave certainty. We feel safer when we know what's next, when the path ahead is clear. But God rarely works within the limits of our comfort zone. He uses uncertainty to grow our capacity for trust. He lets us sit in the tension of not knowing so we can develop spiritual endurance. Because what good is a dream if the person carrying it isn't ready to handle its weight? Think about it. If God gave you everything you wanted right now, could you actually sustain it? Could you handle the responsibility, the visibility, the spiritual weight that comes with the blessing? Most of us want the reward without the refinement, but the truth is, the waiting season is the proving ground of character. It's the place where your faith muscles are stretched and strengthened. It's where you learn to rely on something deeper than your own ability, to depend on grace, not grind. There's something psychologically powerful about learning to sit in the unknown without losing peace. The human mind resists it. It wants resolution. That's why many people settle prematurely. They take the first opportunity that comes along because they're tired of waiting. But what if that almost right opportunity is the very thing keeping you from the perfect one? The discipline of patience is one of the greatest spiritual tools you can develop, because it teaches you to value timing as much as vision. From a philosophical point of view, delay challenges our illusion of control. It exposes how tightly we cling to our own plans. When we experience delay, we either spiral into frustration or surrender into faith. The first option leads to burnout, the second leads to transformation. The waiting period isn't God being silent, it's Him being strategic. He's rearranging circumstances, shaping people, and aligning moments that haven't even entered your timeline yet. While you're worried about what's not happening, He's already preparing what's about to happen. The greatest shifts in life don't come from things happening to you. They come from what's happening in you. Waiting forces you to reflect, to refine your motives, to strip away the noise. You start asking deeper questions. Why do I really want this? What am I trying to prove? What am I afraid of losing? Those are the questions that turn waiting into wisdom. The delay becomes sacred space where clarity replaces confusion. And there's another layer to this emotionally. Waiting humbles us. It reminds us that we're not in control of everything. That humility creates room for gratitude. Suddenly, you stop fixating on what's missing and start noticing what's already working. Gratitude shifts your energy, and energy shapes your perception. When you see your life through gratitude, waiting stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like preparation. You realize you're not stuck, you're being shaped. If you look back on your life, you'll notice that the most meaningful breakthroughs didn't come when you forced them. They came when you were finally ready. The relationship, the opportunity, the idea, they appeared right after a long stretch of uncertainty. That's not coincidence, that's divine timing. You can't rush what God is still building. Every delay has a purpose, even if it's invisible right now. So if you're in that in-between space where nothing seems to be moving, stop fighting it. Don't waste your energy trying to pry open a door that God has temporarily closed. Instead, use this time to become the kind of person who's ready when the right door opens. Build the discipline, the faith, the clarity, and the courage that the next level of your life will require. Because here's the truth, God's delays are not denials. They are divine appointments wrapped in disguise. And when the waiting season finally ends, you'll realize it wasn't a pause at all. It was preparation for something greater than you ever imagined. You know, sometimes the doors that slam shut the hardest are the ones that end up saving us. It doesn't feel that way in the moment, of course. When you lose a job, miss an opportunity, or watch something you were counting on disappear, it's natural to feel frustrated, even betrayed. You start asking, why would God let this happen? Why would He take away something I needed? But what if that rejection wasn't a loss? It was direction. What if every no you've ever received was God's way of steering you towards something far more aligned with your purpose? Dr. David Yongi Cho often reminded people that the Holy Spirit doesn't just comfort, He also corrects. He doesn't just open doors. Sometimes He closes them loudly. And the reason He does that is because we're often too emotionally attached to our own plans to let them go willingly. From a psychological perspective, the human brain hates uncertainty. It would rather stay in a situation that's comfortable but unfulfilling than risk stepping into the unknown. So when God interrupts that comfort, it feels painful, but pain is often the first sign that change is happening. It's the push that gets us moving when we wouldn't move on our own. When a door closes, most people interpret it as failure. They assume something went wrong or that they've been disqualified. But philosophically, that's a very narrow view of how growth works. If you look at nature, every ending is also a beginning. A seed has to die before it becomes a tree. The night has to fall before morning comes. God built that rhythm into creation to teach us how to trust the process. Closed doors are part of that rhythm. They signal transition. You might not see it now, but something in your life has to end so that something better can begin. Think about how many times you've prayed for clarity, and instead of getting answers, you got confusion. It's not because God ignored your prayer, it's because He's shifting your direction. You asked for clarity about a plan that wasn't His. And when that happens, He doesn't argue with you. He starts rearranging your circumstances. The job that once seemed stable suddenly isn't. The people you depended on start to drift away. It's not chaos, it's calibration. God is aligning your path with your purpose. The problem is that when we're in the middle of that process, it doesn't feel divine. It feels like loss. But this is where faith becomes practical. Not emotional, not abstract, but deeply functional. Faith isn't pretending everything's okay. It's trusting that there's meaning behind the mess. Psychologically, faith acts as an anchor for the mind. It gives uncertainty a purpose. When you believe that God's redirection is working for you, not against you, you stop fighting the closed doors and start learning from them. There's something incredibly freeing about realizing you don't have to make every door open. You don't have to force your way into every opportunity. The right ones won't require manipulation or burn out. They'll unfold naturally when you're aligned with God's timing. The doors that are truly yours will respond to obedience, not obsession. That's how the Spirit leads, subtly, silently, sometimes through disappointment. And there's another truth we often overlook. Rejection clarifies calling. Every door that closes eliminates an option that was never meant for you. It's God's way of simplifying your life so you can focus on what truly matters. When you stop mourning what didn't work out, you start seeing what's trying to emerge. And what's emerging is usually not a job, not a title, not a status. It's a deeper awareness of who you are and what you're capable of when you're not chasing approval. From a philosophical standpoint, there's beauty in limitation. When something is removed from your life, it creates space, and that space is sacred. It's in that emptiness that creativity, faith, and purpose are born. The closed door forces you to listen more closely to the inner voice of God instead of the outer noise of the world. And once you begin to recognize that voice, you stop fearing the unknown. You start trusting the unfolding. So, if it feels like everything familiar is falling apart, maybe it's because God is rearranging the map. The job you lost, the plan that failed, the door that wouldn't open, they were never the destination. They were simply directions leading you to where you were always meant to go. You know, one of the most liberating realizations you can ever have is that your provision doesn't come from a paycheck. It comes from purpose. We've been conditioned to believe that security is tied to employment, that if we just land the right job or make a certain amount of money, we'll finally feel safe. But deep down, you and I both know that's not true, because no amount of income can replace the peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. That kind of peace comes from alignment, not achievement. It's the difference between working for approval and working from purpose. Dr. David Yongi Cho often said that obedience to God unlocks blessings that human effort could never produce. And that's not some mystical idea. It's a psychological and spiritual principle. When you operate from obedience, you shift from anxiety to authority. You stop reacting to circumstances and start responding to calling. That's a massive mental shift. Because once you believe that your source is God, not your boss, not the market, not the economy, you stop living in fear of loss. You begin to understand that as long as you're walking in obedience, you'll always have what you need, exactly when you need it. The problem is that most people confuse provision with control. They think that by working harder, longer, or smarter, they can guarantee stability. And sure, discipline matters, effort matters, but there's a limit to what human strength can produce. Obedience, on the other hand, moves you beyond those limits. It connects you to a system of divine provision that doesn't depend on circumstances. When Elijah obeyed God and went to the brook, the ravens brought him food. When that brook dried up, God led him to a widow who had just enough flour to feed them both. And somehow, that little never ran out. That's what obedience does. It positions you for supernatural sustainability. Philosophically speaking, obedience is the surrender of ego. It's choosing alignment over ambition. In a world that constantly tells you to hustle harder and make it happen, obedience feels counterintuitive. It looks passive from the outside, but it's actually the highest form of active faith. You're saying, I trust God's direction more than my own logic. And that's not weakness, that's wisdom. Because your logic can only see today, but obedience connects you to foresight that stretches into eternity. Psychologically, something shifts when you live this way. You stop chasing external validation. You stop performing for approval. You start operating from a deep sense of peace that's rooted in trust. That trust becomes your emotional anchor when everything else feels uncertain. You realize that provision isn't a transaction, it's a relationship. God's favor isn't earned, it's received through obedience. And the moment you understand that, anxiety loses its grip. Here's what's fascinating. When people live disconnected from obedience, they often overcompensate with control. They plan obsessively, work restlessly, and worry constantly. But no matter how much they do, it never feels like enough. That's because control is an illusion. It creates effort without assurance. Obedience, though, gives you assurance even when you don't have all the answers. You might not see how everything will work out, but you can rest knowing that the one who called you has already made provision for what's ahead. This isn't about quitting your job or abandoning responsibility. It's about changing the foundation of your security. Your job can be a channel of provision, but it's not the source. The source is God, and His resources are infinite. When you understand that, your relationship with work changes. You start bringing purpose to your job instead of trying to pull identity from it. You stop measuring your value by what you earn and start measuring it by how you serve. There's a quiet power in that mindset. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need to prove anything, because it's anchored in obedience. You become unshakable, not because everything's easy, but because you know who's in charge of your future. And that kind of peace, that kind of security, is something no paycheck can ever buy. So, if you've been measuring your life by your job title or your bank balance, take a breath and remember this. Your true provision doesn't flow from occupation, it flows from obedience. The moment you start walking in alignment with God's will, you'll discover that every resource you need is already waiting for you on the path of purpose.